find your dedicated friend group who's just hyped on what you do, who's going to give you the real feedback. You know, find your peers in your scene who are going to give you real constructive, like, hey, maybe try this key or this BPM or things is more specific, you know? And I think when you surround yourself with that, you're more likely to be in a healthier mindset.
Totally.
And your output is going to be greater because you're not feeling so beat down all the time.
Take me to the beginning of where does music and art come into your life early age?
Perfect. So, I mean, I have always been, I guess, musically inclined.
Sure.
I started, both my parents, I always laugh. My mom, well, growing up, my mom was was the Beatles fan. My dad was the West Coast hip hop fan. So we saw two sides of the coin growing up, my brother and I. But I started in musical theater. I think a lot of kids, that's kind of like where you dip your toes into.
Sure.
And that's kind of was the first place that I realized this is what I wanted to do and this was the lane I wanted to pursue. I started studying vocal performance at a really young age, again, using musical theater to kind of drive that boat. And for a long time, I thought that was going to be my end game. Fully, you know, a lot of my middle school, high school years were dedicated to the performing arts. I was living in San Francisco, and so I was doing a lot with the ACT, which is the professional company in San Francisco.
Did you want to be an actress? Like, was that?
I thought I was going to be Belle in Beauty and the Beast on Broadway.
Yes,
as any young teen would do.
Course. Right.
And then I very quickly realized, because again, we're talking late 90s, early 2000s, that realistically there was still typecasting, and that was a huge thing. And I think that's not something that we talk about a lot when it comes to youth in entertainment.
Sure.
Because I think whether it's parental figures or whether it's companies, they want to hide the fact that exists.
Yep.
You know, I modeled from a really young age. I was just, you know, I did anything and everything I could I'm a Leo. I liked being in the spotlight. I'm going to admit that here. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And, you know, my parents did a really good job of, if you want to do something, we're going to back you. And so what happened was, you know, getting into high school, doing vocal performance, I just made the joke, wanted to be Belle and Beauty and the Beast. And very quickly I realized the shows I was getting cast in were The King and I, and things of that lane. And when you realize that those types of stereotypes exist, you kind of have two choices, in my opinion. You either ride that wave and you become the first to maybe break that glass ceiling, or you pivot. And for me, what happened is I started to realize that I didn't want to settle for that. And I didn't want to go another 10, 15 years, because I was losing out to castings because of the left, right, and center.
Yes.
So at that time, I started really getting into like rock music. I started going out to different shows. I started going to festivals. There was an incredible festival that the radio station Live 105 put on, which is like the K-Rock of Northern California. So there's a festival called BFD. My parents would let my brother and I run rampant. They got us tickets. We would there. It would be like from noon to midnight. So we would get there at like 12:05, right? And when I was 15, I saw DJ Am.
Yes.
And that completely changed the game for me, because it was really the first time that I saw someone who had control of a dance floor, had control of a crowd, but I hadn't seen a DJ in that sense. Or, you know, my idea of DJing was a wedding DJ or bat mitzvah DJ or something like that.
Yes.
And I was absolutely blown away at the crowd control, at the energy, and how he was able to go from Oasis to Tupac to, you know, XYZ. If you don't know who DJ Am is, I strongly recommend looking into, you know, his videos, old videos on YouTube. I do think today that if he was still around, he would continue to break barriers within the DJ genre.
He was really, like, for me, that I saw Scratch, the documentary, and like that changed my whole life, because I was like, what turntablism? Like, who are these people? But then I remember like thinking there was AM, there was Steve Aoki, and then there was Z-Trip. And I was like, I kind of want to combine all these things together, you know, just for like my thing. But like, it's a hard thing to maybe understand or even describe, like, if you're not a DJ, but like with AM, what he was doing with like the wordplay with the records and how he was getting from one thing to the next was like a poet and like poetry 1,000%. And like just finding that small snippet, but doing it, like so seamlessly between this and this. And it really was like, even then I clocked that I'm like, this is super special. Like I know when I watch this dude, like it is really, really special.
1,000%. And I think a lot of, when I talk to younger producers, specifically in electronic, when you ask someone like their goal, I want the Vegas residency, AM was the first person who coined the Vegas residency, his residency. Yeah. Yep. And then Palms. Like, so a lot of people, when you go to Las Vegas and you see the Tiestos and the Aokis and the Alessos and all that, like he was really the one who made that a viable career. And in my opinion, I was able to take his career path and go to my parents and say, being a DJ can be more. And he's really what, in my opinion, what made the DJ in the same level and even ballpark as a rock star.
Yes.
And so
did you do that?
I did. I literally did.
Did you go to your parents and you were like, hey, let me show you
I can do this. Yes.
Oh, wow. And you used him as like a business model. Wow.
1,000%.
Wow. So cool.
And then once I got to LA, I then used Aoki as the model because I was like, here's a person that looks like me. Here's a person who is this Cali born and bred person.
Yep.
And to this day, I always joke that Aoki's always been the blueprint for me because he's expanded his business outside of just music into fashion, into just pop culture in general.
Yes.
So I'm skipping a little bit here, but
No. Yeah.
But it was a great way for me to, again, I kind of locked in on him. I said, okay, if this is how this is, I can do this. You know what I mean? This is how it's done. Fast forward, found myself in LA, found myself in the LA open format circuit. Because again, it was a means to an ends. And for me, it was, okay, if I can get myself into the right situations. And at that time, music production for me it wasn't even really a reality because I didn't know that really existed.
Yes.
Because again, what I was listening to at home on my iPad was, the Linkin Parks and the, the bands. And so, I thought open format was going to be my end game. I thought I was going to do the LA circuit and then do Atlantic City and Miami and New York and then make my way to Vegas and that would be it. And I think I was very naive in that sense because I thought that when you're younger, you don't realize that there's ageism and you don't realize like the other roadblocks.
Sure.
Again, circling back to typecasting, right? You don't realize that there's different things. And so when I started to realize that you couldn't just be one-dimensional is when I started going, okay, so what can take me to the next level? And that led me to music production and then went to Icon Collective because I realized that if I could coin I really started with the intention of doing mashups.
Yeah.
Mashups I could put on MySpace, mashups I could put on SoundCloud.
Totally.
To give myself a signature, because I did have signature mixes that, and a lot of my peers that I still talk to, like the JCOs or, people like that, we would share back and forth like, oh, this is how I put these two songs together or whatever. Of course, doing the Icon program and all of that, I really fell in love with just the actual creation of a song from start to finish. At the same time, for those of you who don't know, my brother goes by Dak J. Nils. He's a bass producer, been in the game a very, very long time. And Tanner, my brother, was really the one who was like, you don't have to you keep putting yourself into a box and you keep kind of going, okay, this is the end game. And so I started dabbling into bass music and I absolutely loved bass music because I thought there was I saw a lot of parallels between bass and the punk scene.
Yes.
Just in terms of like the fandom, the energy behind it, the kind of like, don't give a fuck. I don't know if we can swear on the podcast.
Yes, you definitely can.
Yeah. Just kind of that DGAF attitude. And I was really, really attracted to that. And I also was attracted to the fact that with bass music, there was just kind of this like messy rawness. And again, it's kind of what I was seeing at like a Banana Split Sundays, right? Those are the shows that like the Aokis and the AMs were playing. A-Track was playing those shows too. Like it was just really kind of that indie sleaze messy era. There was club photos weren't being hyper edited. You didn't have the social media apps where everything was the highlight reel. Did my thing in bass music. Right. Fast forward, we as an artist, we all grow as we do. And I started falling in love with house music. And I started, I was very fortunate that DJing took me to other countries and other places and other nightclubs. And something that I saw within house was that unlike in other scenes, as you got older, within house, you were getting more. In some places, and I'll say this in the US, as people get older, I think there's a mentality of people are out of touch.
Sure.
And what I was seeing with house, especially in Europe, was the older people got, the more revered they were.
Yes.
And so again, my analytical brain went to, how do I keep doing this for as long as fucking possible?
Yes.
So I need to pivot into a lane. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm doing this all for money and for sustainability, but that was really, this is all I've ever wanted to do and it's all I've ever focused on.
Right.
So for me, there is no other option. And so if I put my back against the proverbial wall, I'm going to keep finding new outlets.
Yeah, you just want to do it.
I just want to do it.
Yeah, so whatever it is I need to do to keep doing the thing.
Right. So if you're going to tell me, oh, in this genre you're going to age out, or in this, or like you got to change, then great. I'm going to do. And also too, I think as we age, our tastes change.
Sure.
And I was finding myself, I was making sets to play within bass music like the week of, versus I was consuming house music on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
And I felt like I was getting imposter syndrome. I was like, am I cosplaying a dubstep DJ right now?
Yes.
Which isn't authentic to my fans either.
Yeah.
And, you know, and we can talk about the nuances of my project in a bit, but, you know, with the Wenzday project, it is very conceptual and it is very cinematic, and my fans are predominantly female. So I was finding that house was a different lane for me to explore that, and also like circle back to the music and circle back to them. And so basically 2020, I pivoted to full on to house music.
Yeah.
It's been an insane ride so far.
Sure.
And I just released a new song on Insomniac Records last week. So
amazing.
Here we are.
Yeah. Tell me. So I actually want to go back. So you didn't gloss over it, but you were like, I'm a Leo. Like you just kind of said it like that.
Yeah.
But talk to me about like the like performing. Yeah. So performing as like the thing you do and being a performer as part of your identity. What do you think it was that like when you were young, that was the carrot that it's like, oh, if I do this thing, this is the way it makes me feel? Like, why do you think that you loved performing so much?
So, well, that's a loaded question. I think, so I always make the joke that, the reason I started DJing is because no one invited me to the school dance. So I had to find myself in a position of importance.
Sure.
And if I DJ'd the school dance, no one would know I was a loser. No, I'm just kidding. But I always say that Wenzday, or whatever character that I take on within my project, because I may find a new artist project down the road, is a hyperbolized version of Taylor. So anything that Taylor can't do or doesn't want to do or is scared to do, I can funnel that into Wenzday.
Oh, you create a character.
Correct.
Ooh. I love that. Because I don't know if you know, but like when I had my project, there was also a character.
Yes.
And like it was the exact same thing, because like I loved DJing and I loved I actually loved DJing though when it was the DJ was in the corner and you could just watch the dance floor, and it was almost like social experiments that I'm like, well, what if I do this? And I could see. But then once it got like we were now on stage and now there's like, you know, all the lights, I was shy and like my hands would shake and like I would get nervous, you know, on the mic. And that was part of maybe a protection mechanism or whatever for me, is like, I'm like, oh, I'm going to create a character. Because my manager at the time, he was like talking to me about like old WWF wrestling.
Exactly.
And he'd be like, hey, he's like, watch how they like engage the crowd. Because I would always look down and like I would be intimidated, you know, by the audience and all that. And then I did study and I'm like, oh, they have characters. And I did like, I had done a little bit of acting and sort of tried that. And there is something to like, well, let me step into the character. And then the character is actually really confident.
Right.
And then it's like, once I could get into like that, then I was like, oh, I'm standing up on speakers and I'm, you know, yelling at the crowd, and, you know, I became like a different person. But mine was more of like, I think protection or like out of necessity.
I think at some point, I mean, I think all artists, like part of the reason, I think what makes a successful artist is a willingness to be vulnerable, right? You're basically putting your heart on a silver platter and serving it up to people and saying, please like it and accept it and pay me. And, you know,
totally.
Those things. And I, you know, look, even going back to the name Wenzday, I picked the name Wenzday because universally and globally, the character of Wenzday Adams is the epitome of a badass female.
Right.
A girl who doesn't really care what other people think and kind of walks to the beat of her own drum and all of that. And so, and it wasn't that I am a fan of the Wenzday Adams, of the Addams Family franchise, but I wanted something that could, even if you didn't understand, like let's say you were Korean, right? You didn't speak English.
Yeah.
If you know the character and you know what Addams Family is, you can kind of assume and know what you're kind of gonna get with my project, right? There's kind of an element of dark, kind of a punk rock element, kind of a feminism empowerment vibe to that. Sure. But yeah, I think it goes back to musical theater days where I liked being a character. I mean, obviously I have pink hair right now, you know, but yeah, the hyperbolized version of Taylor was more for me. I could create and write songs that I could just tell a story that wasn't necessarily reflective of me.
Right.
You know, it's always kind of fun for me to dabble into spaces, or, you know, if my friend told me a story, you know, I could do or perform or write a song about that moment.
Yep.
fast forward, obviously probably one of what my breakthrough hit was and breakthrough piece of work was Heartbreak,
right,
which came out with Insomniac Records in 2018. And that was really, I was going through a very traumatic breakup. Taylor was basically on the floor and I needed to pick myself up. And so what I did to channel and counter that was channel it through Wenzday.
Yes.
So Taylor can cry and be sad about this person who broke my heart, but Wenzday is going to take this, create work from it, strengthen, empower myself, monetize it,
yep,
and perform it. And that's the way I kind of healed myself. And through that, I really created this brand. My fans then coined themselves Heartbreakers. I didn't give them that name.
Right.
But they started connecting with the music, and I would start meeting fans who would come to me and say, I was going through this, whether it was a divorce or abuse or traumatic situation, and I was able to lean into your song.
Yes.
And so I was like, okay, cool, I have something here. And, so for me and for all my fans, that's what I like to base the music around. And it's not always just about leaning into soundness, but also growth.
Is there a pretty strong distinction between Taylor and Wenzday? And do you have sort of internal conversations where it's like, hey, Taylor's going through this right now, but we're about to step into Wenzday land, and I gotta
100%. I mean, I think something that's not really talked about when someone says they want to be an artist, and specifically a touring and performing artist, is that your personal life does suffer.
Yes.
I've been very fortunate in the past couple of years that I'm basically gone every weekend for shows. Whether I'm not in the US or overseas or things like that, but I've also Taylor has missed out on a lot of things. I've missed weddings, funerals, celebrations, things like that because I've been away at shows. And there's also a personal sacrifice where you're also, until you have the capacity to have a team, you're mostly by yourself.
Yes. Oh, totally.
And there's been a lot of times where you're in the hotel room and you're tired and you're hungry and you're sick or whatever it is, but it's like, okay, cool. But now because all the fans who bought tickets, they're not here to take on that. They're here to be entertained.
Yep. Yeah. And you have a job to do. Did you, sorry, I do want to ask when you're younger and you're performing and it's you get the feeling of just whatever, a good performance feels like, the relationship that you have with the audience. Because when I think you get into that dedication of I literally feel like I could, throw up right now. I have a fever, all those things. But now I need to go put on a show for people that have paid money to see something. Because, if somebody has a normal 9-to-5 job, they would call, their boss and say, I'm sorry, I'm really not feeling great today. Right. I'll call you tomorrow and let you know how I feel. But as an artist and a performer, you have no one to call.
Yeah,
and,
it's you.
you could cancel the show, but then you have all these heartbreakers that are
they'd feel let down.
Yeah. And they're so stoked. And it's their night out, to go see, their artist that they love.
Well, and I think the biggest thing with artists is we have a responsibility to our fans. I'm not going to pretend that, we don't have one of the best jobs in the world, right? I'm literally getting paid to do what I love on a weekly basis.
Yes.
But with that comes a responsibility and integrity that you have to prove that if you buy a ticket, I'm going to show up for you. If you decide that you're going to come to one of my shows, I'm going to give you the best night of the life. There's that fan to artist trust.
Yep.
And I think sometimes that gets taken advantage of a little bit. And that's not to say if something's going on that you should, obviously you're a human being first. You should take time for yourself. But I do think that where projects and things start to slip for people is when fans lose that faith and that trust in you.
Right.
It's just you could bring it to something as simple as merch. I make sure that any piece of merch that I put out, I've tried on, it's cut and sew, it's made to my liking. It's the best quality and I would never sell something that I wasn't going to wear myself. That's just a really tangible example. But, and because again, I value the fact that, as artists, we basically have our hand out 99% of the time. We're saying, buy our merch, come to our shows, stream our music, buy our music. It's kind of a buy.
It's interesting. Give me. It's support, please support my thing.
Right. Yeah. If you worked at Trader Joe's, it's less stake in the game. You're not going to the customer. If they buy a bottle of water or don't, it's not your bottle of water.
That's right.
And I think I really became cognizant of that during the pandemic, because during that time, a lot of the artists, people did Patreon, we did streams, we did fundraisers, we were selling a lot of merch. And I was asking buy to people who were literally in the same financial situation as I was. Everyone was unemployed.
Yes.
No one knew what was going on.
Right.
And it's really, it's kind of an odd thing if you think about it. Like it's, or even,
well, it sounds like it's respect. To me, it sounds like, when you're not just saying like, hey, if I'm going to put my name on something, it's going to be good. But you're also saying that it's like, hey, I respect you enough that like, if you're going to give me or my project, your money, and you're going to wear my logo
name,
on your body, I'm going to do the best. I'm like, I wouldn't give you something that I wouldn't wear myself, or I'm going to wear. That just to me sounds like respect and like a good relationship.
100%.
Between you and the audience is it's an audience, but it's like a relationship between people.
Yeah, and I think we're really lucky, specifically in the electronic music space, is that we as artists have, in my opinion, the most direct fan connection. And I always use this example that majority of the times, if a fan is DMing a pop star, 9 times out of 10, the person, if someone even responds, it's someone from their team. It's a social media person, it's a marketing person, it's a manager.
Right.
There's kind of a wall of separation.
Right.
And what I love so much about electronic music is that 9 times out of 10, it's the opposite. If I were to, and because I remember doing this when I was, starting out sending music around, like if I were to DM Steve Aoki, I'm just using a big name, it was him on the other end saying, thank you for the demo. We should set up a meeting with Democ or whatever. And I really value that fan to artist connection, because even at the highest level, and I even get, kind of the imposter syndrome when I'm hitting up even larger people than myself, you still know if I'm DMing Chris Lake, it's still Chris Lake on the other end.
Totally.
And you don't see that a lot in pop or rock or hip hop. There's always these teams around. And I think that's what's really cool about our space is that I think, even you got the chain smoker, especially now with like TikTok and all that, there's just such that you still have that chord, you know what I mean?
And that's what I feel like that was part of how it was, even like if you go back to MySpace days,
100%.
And then of course like SoundCloud era, like it was like that.
Yeah, it was Skrillex reposting you. Totally. It was Rusko reposting you or whatever. Yeah,
totally. And sending you like some little thing, and like, and you could like, man, I would use that stuff like rocket fuel, where 100%. It's like, oh my gosh, like so and so, like Skrillex played a song, or like he liked it, and it's like, well, this guy's taste, the validation, from like that support from the community, and you're totally spot on that like it's not really in other genres that like that's happening, because our world, I think there is a level of competition.
1,000%.
But
1,000%.
It's not the way that maybe it is in hip hop, or it's not, like even band world, there's a lot of competition.
Well, and also too, we're also in one of the few segments of the entertainment industry where you can look however you want to look. You can be whoever you want to be. You can put a mask on. You cannot, no one is saying you're not cute enough to be a DJ, or you're not white enough to be a DJ, or you should be a guy, you should be a girl, whatever it is. And again, the reason I started with kind of the theater analogy with typecasting was I found myself in like what I would consider the healthiest space possible within this lane. You know what I mean? No one is telling a child like, oh, you can never be a DJ. As long as you got good taste and you want to work hard or whatever, you can do it. Versus other things like where, I might not be tall enough to be a professional basketball player.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think with great power comes great responsibility, because we as artists within this genre and in this niche, we really need to foster that.
Ever wonder how to truly cut through the noise and get your music to a broader audience? The Cult Creatives is a niche agency servicing the communities and brands surrounding the spaces of music and fashion. Our unique backgrounds of being highly involved with some of the largest music and fashion brands in the world gives us a unique perspective on how to connect creatives with their audiences. We offer a variety of services, including creative direction, design, photography, videography, and strategy. Head to thecultcreatives.com to learn more. The Cult Creatives, not to be replicated. But if you try, we wouldn't blame you.
Talk to me about that, because like if say I'm a young female DJ producer getting in the game, what are some like pieces of advice that now that like, you have so much more of the mountain to climb, but like, your view of where you sit on the mountain now versus, like starting, But what kind of advice would you give, that young
anybody who's going into it is the biggest thing I always learn, and I'll use DJing specifically, is one of my DJ mentors told me the best DJ is the best sound person. And what he meant by that was, if you're going to do this professionally, you need to be able to troubleshoot any sort of issue and not rely on anyone else to fix it for you.
Yep.
Because that's the fastest way you're going to gain respect. So if I was at a nightclub, and this is like turntable days, and my needle started slipping or whatever, let me make sure that I have 4 extras in my backpack. Or if your USB fails, make sure that you can't look around and go, and I think that gets amplified when it comes to females, because people always want to have an excuse of like why someone is succeeding. It just, in this day and age, there's always a reason of like, why is this person doing better than me?
Yeah. Or why they're not.
And why they're not. And so if you can eliminate all reasonable doubt that you should be there, it's going to make your mental health better. It's going to, you're going to be able to kind of put the blinders on. And so that's my biggest piece of advice is, if you're really going to get into it, understand every facet of it. Even if you just want to make house music, we'll find out the origins of it. If you want to be a DJ, don't just listen to hip hop or pop, listen to country, listen to jazz, like verse yourself in everything so that you don't ever give people a reason to question your dedication or your passion for something.
Sure.
That might be up to interpretation.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like it's like how serious you're taking something.
Yeah.
And then preparation, the research and kind of like what you're talking about. It's really just dedication. And you're right. I actually really like sort of like the reframing, because I think that's for anyone that's 100%. Like really getting into, really anything, but especially like different like artistic mediums. I heard this really great thing on like a podcast, and it was, this guy was, he was a writer, and he said that he had an uncle who was like a really prolific screenwriter, and he was like, I think I want to write, and I think I want to like, write, books and movies. And the uncle was like, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy you a bus ticket, and the bus ticket will take you from New York to LA. And he's like, just trust me, like go on the trip. And he was like, no, I don't want to do that. I'm working on something right now, and I'm sort of focused on what I'm writing. And he would tell his uncle like, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm not taking the trip. I'm not taking the trip. And then it was like, whatever, 5 or 6 years later, he takes the trip and just has like the craziest experience.
Right.
And then everything he has written since has been about the things he learned, about America, and sort of that being the inciting incident, or like the first thing. Because what the uncle was saying is that like, you need something to write about.
Right.
You need to have like, which is kind of like what, dedication and research and, like literally the exact same day that I bought my 1200s after seeing Scratch, the documentary, I bought Last Night a DJ Saved My Life.
I love it.
The book from Urban Outfitters. Yes. And because of exactly what you said, that I'm like, if I'm going to do this, and like, I don't even think then I had the identity that's like, I'm going to be a DJ, but I think that I'm like, if I'm going to DJ, I respect this art form so much that I do want to know about it. Right. And it was so like reading that book, I wasn't like a voracious reader, and like, to be honest, didn't really read a lot of books, but that book I think I finished in 2 days, because I was like, whoa, like that's like Detroit techno, that's the story. And it's like, you just like, there was so much in there that I was like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. But I did it for the exact reason that you mentioned.
Yeah, and I think now, especially with platforms like TikTok, I mean, the competition has never been fiercer. It was really funny. I just had a meeting with my label last week, and they told me, I don't know if this is true or not, but they told me on average, the average Spotify playlist curator receives 1,000 songs a week.
Wow.
And this is not anyone just uploading. This is like a verified, label-backed, good music, right? And the point of that was to tell me, because I was getting frustrated in my own, why aren't we getting picked up with this? And they were like, the competition's never been fiercer. And so part of the reason I would say versing yourself in everything is that, unfortunately, in this day and age, competition's never been more great. And also, too, there are a lot of kids, like I always tell my artists, like who I signed with 40 Ounce Cult, which is the label I own with my brother, you may think you're writing a good song, and I guarantee you there's a 9-year-old somewhere in Norway writing probably a better song than you on half like priced equipment than you. So you have to stay on your toes. You have to stay relevant. And that's for me because I think there's so much to keep up with.
Yeah.
But also too, if you're not excited about the changes and like new opportunities and what the future holds, then like we also can't just live in the past. I have a lot of friends who resent that CDJs are a thing. Oh, we should go back to turntables. Well, we aren't. Right. So you should learn how to use the 3000s to the best of your capability because let me tell you, there are so many crazy things you can do with that piece of equipment.
Right.
Embrace it versus resenting it.
Yeah.
I think is the biggest. Embracing change and embracing growth and embracing competition.
Yeah. So talk to me about that. Like, would you say that you're a competitive person?
Yes.
You are.
Yes.
And because I think
mostly I think with myself. I think that's where it is that I'm a self-motivator.
Yes.
That's not always the case with everyone else. But again, for me, like I mentioned earlier, I've gotten how I motivate is I put myself against a wall. Like I put my own back against the wall, which isn't the healthiest coping mechanism, by the way, because sometimes I do stress myself out to the point where I'm sick or whatever. But I've realized that, especially in this lane, artists now are expected to do more than ever. We have to be content creators and editors and, podcast hosts, radio show. Like we're expected to kind of be a jack of all trades.
Right.
And so my way of motivating myself is to continually challenge myself. Because that's just how I'm going to get better. And that's how, again, I'm not going to let myself fail at this.
Right.
So
because we're all like the hero in our own story.
Yeah.
And so when you create the story and the narrative in your mind that it's like, hey, our back's against the wall right now, if like sometimes you can create that story and like people will freeze and they don't move. But like if you are the type of person that actually is like, oh, good, because now this is like, now I get to turn it on.
And I watched, really random. I was on TikTok. I was watching an awards show ceremony, and Cher was getting a Lifetime Achievement Award. And she was telling people that like prior to releasing Believe, which is like one of her biggest records, she had been dropped by her management, dropped by her agency, dropped by her record label, like multiple times over. Like people just didn't think she had it.
Yep.
And she just kept pushing. And obviously that song was like one of the first instances of auto-tune. And a lot of people were very turned off by it. And she was like willing to take chances, willing to invest in technology, willing to like see what else is out there. Obviously now fast forward, she's getting a Lifetime Achievement Award. And that was really inspiring to me because how many times as artists are we told, oh, this sound is washed or this isn't relevant, or, even for me, when I pivoted house, everyone was like, oh, is that because tech house is really in right now? People want to find an excuse for why you're doing something to rationalize it in their mind.
Sure.
And the reality is most artists aren't rational.
Yeah.
So I think if you keep yourself on your toes, and believe me, it's way easier said than done, because there's definitely days where I'm like, I'm tired.
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting is that, so there is the music business. Mm-hmm. So there is music, and then there's the business component of, said art that's created. And the people that are involved in the business side, in order to be successful or keep their job, they are supposed to find the patterns and the formulas and ways to make money and so that it works and so that they can keep doing what they want to do.
Right.
But what happens is I think when you're in it, it's so awesome because your fans are very supportive, and then you have your people and other artists and peers that in our scene generally are like very supportive. Yeah. But the business side of the industry can be very pessimistic and will tell you why things won't work. Yeah. And like, that's like, sorry, not for us, doesn't fit into our formula, doesn't fit the pattern. And I think that, when you're around that all the time, and it's like, maybe there's a side of it where it's like, oh, you kind of get used to like the rejection or hearing the no's or like the not, it's not going to work. But sometimes, it's taxing, like hearing it so much. But I think that what I'm curious about is that like, does it become like fuel for you hearing those things, or will you like sometimes like, will you take it to heart and be like, oh man, like everybody's saying no about this thing?
It's really interesting because I'd like to say, no, that doesn't affect me. But the reality is it does. And I think the nugget, I'll use Heartbreak House as an example. When I came up with Heartbreak House on my own, I was going through a breakup And background on the EP, it's a 4-track EP. Each track is a different stage of a breakup. And I created this whole, what I call the Wenzday universe. It was a whole story. It was a character, everything. And when I gave it to not my current management, my past management, they kept calling it a manifesto, which is kind of has a derogatory term, right? You're mocking someone for the amount of detail. And I didn't know that this is how artists fleshed out conceptual ideas, right? Sure. I created a character, and this is like a 50-page like Google Doc, you know what I mean? And it was funny because I was like, well, let's shop it around. And we took it to labels, and I got called all sorts of names. I got called the mad scientist. I got called because I basically presented the story in the universe. I presented what I thought an ideal budget would be to create music videos to bring this universe to life, and then how I wanted the EP to roll out.
Right.
And I got called every name under the sun. But I felt it like literally in my DNA. I was like, there is something here, I promise you. And if it doesn't work and if it fails, then fine. I will give up and I'll just go back to One Oak and keep DJing hip hop from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. We finally landed on Insomniac. Insomniac was launching in rotation at the time. And they were the first label that was like, oh, whoa. Like, you're not just giving us 4 songs. You're giving us something that we can build upon and create. You know, and Insomniac, to their credit, they are very conceptual, just each of their festivals, you know? And it was like the first time that all of a sudden because I mean, literally, they were kind of the last one. And my team was telling me, they were like, you know, if they don't go for it, like, this might not be it. You know what I mean? And prior to that, I had graduated from Icon 2 years before. So I had spent 2 years literally crafting this. And most people come out of that school like with like 10 to 20 songs in their arsenal.
Sure. Right.
Not me. I was like writing music video treatments and like, you know, how I wanted my dream stage setup to be. Well, anyways, fast forward, they obviously jumped on it. And, you know, we kind of made an agreement that anytime I would do something in the Wenzday universe and world, we would go to them. And it was really cool because we did Heartbreak House. Fast forward, we did Heartbreakers Club. You know, I got to headline Exchange, and we transformed Exchange into the Heartbreakers Club, into the Wenzday universe. It was the first time I really had seen everything come to life from that Google Doc from 2016.
Yep.
And that was 2023 of last year.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think if you feel something, the long and short of it is like, if you really believe in something and you feel like something special, ride it till the wheels fall off, because you don't know. And of course, like, you could write a song. There's certain songs I drop that I think are really great, and maybe the mass appeal doesn't agree with me or the general population. But, you know, I think for artists, if we become so sanitized and sterilized, music is just like, we want music to last more than a month cycle.
Well, especially when like you're writing an EP that's about a breakup. Even just hearing it now, I'm like, the voice in my head was like, of course that connected, because it's so real and it's something that like people go through. And like a lot of times in dance music, it's like, oh, that's a really interesting sound, or like, oh, I like that little, you know, clip of a sample. And but like when you're actually taking emotion and you're like putting it on tape and like putting that out in your art form, it can connect with people. You're staying with your conviction of, I would like to share this. I know a lot of people are telling me I shouldn't, or maybe a lot of people are saying it won't work, or not, you know, not for us.
They wanted me to water it down. And I think that's what happens with a lot of songwriters and artists is like, yeah, this song is really cool, but let's water it down so that it's more generalized or it appeals to more people. And I think it's the safe route.
Yeah.
And that's totally fine. There's a ton of artists who make money going the safe route. I'm not shading that. But I think when you get to a point where you sanitize too much, you lose the heart and the soul and the connection of it. And I always tell my manager, Ben, who you know very well, obviously, I always tell Ben, I want to write a song that people are going to listen to their car, not just in a nightclub. Because those two places and those two environments are extremely different. If you're in a nightclub, I could play Happy Birthday and people are going to jump around.
Sure. Right.
But if and that's what I always tell them, is the goal is finding the happy medium where people are going to revisit music time and time again. And so I encourage artists to, the reason I bring up Ben is I encourage artists to find your cheering squad and find your team, because I think that's also what's going to help kind of combat those obstacles. And that doesn't even have to be necessarily a manager or an agent. It can be, find your dedicated friend group who's just hyped on what you do, who's going to give you the real feedback. You know, find your peers in your scene who are going to give you real constructive, like, hey, maybe try this key or this BPM or things is more specific, you know. And I think when you surround yourself with that, you're more likely to be in a healthier mindset.
Totally.
And your output is going to be greater because you're not feeling so beat down all the time.
Yeah.
You know, or if you don't have that directly at home, dial in on the fan base on TikTok or Instagram. Find that community on Twitter or Threads.
Yeah.
You know, community is everything when it comes to your brand. And, you know, I always tell people, like, even if only 200 people saw a video I post on TikTok, that's still 200 people who really care about what I'm doing.
Totally.
And so speak to them.
And you know how like that they have that the saying that's like, you're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with?
Yeah.
That like, what's interesting is like, you just bring up the point that like, not everybody has like a Ben, you know, like cheering for them. But the like, this is actually something that it's maybe through COVID, I think I had heard this and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so true. That like when you listen to a podcast or when you watch a YouTube channel or when you read someone's book, you're hanging out with them.
Oh, I love that.
You're actually spending time with them. So even if you don't have someone in your life, even though I haven't met, you know, certain people, I've read 3 or 4 of their books and I feel like I know them because most of the time, I don't know about you, but like if I were to write a book, that like the things I would say in my book would be the things that I would say if you and I were at dinner.
100%.
So it's like when you read someone's book or when you hear them like on a podcast, as long as they're, you know, being, you know, they're themselves, that it's like you can surround yourself with that level of positivity.
I love that.
And
and it's going to be you become your own machine of positivity or inspiration. Like when you figure out the right tools and set yourself up for success, then it becomes automatic. Like you don't find yourself, I mean, every artist is going to go through dry spells and writer's block or whatever. But for the most part, if you can keep things on the up and up, I think that's where the longevity comes in. You know what I mean? And I think that's where, you know, you look at some of these artists who are consistently putting out great hits and tunes. It's because they figured out the formula that works for them.
Right.
Whether it's the right fans, the right team, family, wife, kids, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever it is, you know, they've set themselves up for that.
Yeah. I had there was a guy I used to work with at one of the other agencies, and he would always say like, how you do anything is how you do everything.
I love that.
Yeah. And like that, I think is you can get into a zone where, especially like when you figure like somebody exactly like your story where you have chapters. That there was like, oh yeah, turntablism, you know, that is a chapter, and like club DJing, you know, and like, you know, doing like the open format circuit, like that's a chapter. Bass music is a chapter. House music is a chapter. And you'll have many chapters like in your career. That I think what becomes really interesting is when you then have that retrospective view and you're like, oh, whoa. Like I didn't even realize that there was a through line, you know, with all these things that I was doing, and they're different, but like there was like, you know, Wenzday was in there, or, you know, like, and that to me is always like when you are building the fan base, the ones that will ride with Beyonce from, you know, R&B to country are the ones that it's like, well, it's not really the genre, it's her. It's her. Exactly.
And I think the other thing too is I talk to a lot of artists about this, because I think with everything, like a lot of my peers have changed genres, you know what I mean? And something I hear a lot is like, oh, I wish I would have jumped on the house bandwagon sooner. I wish I had done this, whatever. And I'm like, I don't really wish that, to be honest. Like if I lived my life wishing I had done things sooner or whatever, I kind of be constantly spiraling. And what I try to encourage peers, and I have to remind myself of this, is like, everyone's journey is specific and it's to them. And if I didn't have all those other chapters, like you said, I don't think I'd be ready for the next one. You know, and I think, you know, because there could be a lot of time that I spend wishing I had gone to music school to learn production earlier. Maybe I would have been 5 years more ahead in getting a charting song or whatever. But if I hadn't spent all those times in the club, I probably wouldn't have been set up to play a 4-hour set where everyone's engaged and the dance floor is not empty.
Well, and that,
right?
Like, just the experience of like, I mean, the life that you've lived, the amount of music that has like come through your ears and that you've listened to.
I've never actually thought of it like that.
Like,
that's really cool.
Like if I, you know, as a fan, it's like what I'm interested in is it's like, okay, so you've heard all like, you know, probably millions of songs. But what now with all of that knowledge, what do you think is cool? And like, and then that,
and that's what they're latching onto.
Paired with, what do you want to say now? Like what's going on? And like, it's almost like, you know, stand-up comedy or like, you know, directors going and doing this kind of movie. Like it's like, I just want to know what this person, where are they at right now?
Yeah, what's inside their head?
Like, I'm into the person.
Yes,
you know,
exactly.
Like whether it's a character or, you know, like I'm into like what, you know, you've created. And it's really like the taste of 100%. Just like, you know, what's your taste?
Skull Candy products are made for an on-the-go lifestyle. Headphones, earbuds, and speakers all deliver premium quality sound and a unique sonic experience tuned to you. With active noise-canceling technology, Skull Candy products are sweat, water, and dust resistant. Test for yourself with free shipping on orders over $99. Be prepared for skull-thumping, bone-rattling sound. For the ultimate immersive audio experience, choose Skull Candy. Break free from ordinary audio. Skull Candy, for your head.
And that's what's really cool now, especially through the lens of social media, because obviously that is how most people are getting their art and their music out there, whether you're independent or not. That's what I think is really cool, because for the first time ever, you're able to literally talk to people directly.
Yes.
Like for me personally, like, I always like to film my TikToks as if I'm like FaceTiming one of my friends getting ready.
Yeah.
Because I found that's the most organic way for me to like, whether it's stream of consciousness or there's a point to it or whatever. But when people attach themselves to who you are as a person and like what you have to say or where you've been, then you're set up. That's every artist's goal, right? I mean, that's why we listen to records from artists who are long past. You know what I mean? Because we are connected to their story and who they are.
Right. Yeah. Talk to me about that. Is that like there is opening yourself up when you have Wenzday and you have Taylor? Yeah. Like, talk to me about that.
So that's really interesting. And it's funny because you're like the second person very recently who asked me about this, because, and I'll use this example. So obviously my fans are called Heartbreakers. My majority of my bodies of work are based around like breakups and things like that. I'm in a very, very happy relationship.
Sure.
But I don't show that. And it was really something that when I was speaking to my labels and things like that, they were like, we really have to have a designation between the character and you, because what we were seeing was when I was consistently posting about like my personal life, fans were either, oh, well, she's not one of us, or they were like, it was really weird. I would have thought that if someone who has been my fan for a long time, who knew I was really sad about breakups, would be happy to see that I'm happy in a relationship. It was very much quite the opposite. I was getting messages like, you're a traitor. My partner was getting messages like, this is why she isn't writing the same type of music.
Right.
And so we had to have a very conscious conversation about that. And even when we started dating, I said to him, I said, I am not keeping you a secret. I am not, but I can't, like, my Instagram page, for instance, is not for us.
Sure.
It's for this project.
Right.
And I think that's one of the sacrifices that a lot of people don't realize that artists make.
Yes.
You know, and like we can use like the big example in the world is Taylor Swift. Like the conversation about her dating life is so tired, but the reality is that her bodies of work are based around her personal life, and she's opened that up to criticism or praise. And for me, it's always been kind of finding the happy medium of like, how can I live in the hyperbolized fantasy world of Wenzday when I'm not actually sad right now, or upset at men, women, whatever it is. And so that, you know, that's the artist struggle in any sense. But that's why I try to find inspo and pull inspo from other things or stories. Like, I love referencing cinema. Like Moulin Rouge is one of my favorite movies. Romeo and Juliet's one of my favorite movies. So it's always fun. Sometimes if I'm lacking inspo, I'll put myself like, what if I wrote a song from like Romeo's perspective of this, you know? And that's an exercise in itself. But I'm
because like you found like an ecosystem. And like you feel comfortable that it's like, oh, and the audience is watching a movie, and they're watching your movie. And so if I tune into your movie and I'm like, oh, whoa, this used to be sort of like the super cool, like, you know, sad
girl vibes,
sad, you know, emo, which I wanted. Like, that's why I turned it on. And then now it's like, oh, whoa, this is sort of rainbows and sunshine.
You don't turn on Reservoir Dogs and then get Vanderpump Rules. You're like, whoa,
that's not,
and that's. Yeah, and that was something that we had to combat. And I think it's something I still combat is how do I introduce, because again, too, something that was happening for me is as an artist, my inspiration was dwindling because like I said, I was having to put myself in a negative place or a sad place. And also I do believe in self-manifestation. And so I'm very superstitious of am I going to self-manifest negativity because I'm keeping myself in a dark mindset for my art?
Totally.
And that was something that really crossed my mind of like, am I not allowing myself to grow because I'm still using my breakup in 2016 as my muse? Like,
yeah.
Oh my God, like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't, and that happens, that's a reason why I think a lot of artists, all the fans want them to perform their hit and they go, I'm so tired of this hit.
Totally.
You want to hear my new song?
I'm not there. I'm not there anymore.
Yeah.
What's interesting, and it was something you actually said, really fast, but like you were like, I'm not feeling these emotions anymore. Yeah. But what I did as a creative exercise is I went to classic stories, like a Romeo and Juliet, where it's like, they are feeling that. And like, I can still write, it's like, I wonder how like Romeo felt and, sort of write that song. So it's still something that like, I'm in my world, I'm in this, universe that I've created, but it's not so, personal like that. Right. That's so interesting to me that it's like, because sometimes like artists, you'll just like beat your head against the wall and it's like, I'm not feeling that anymore. So should I like change my brand and change my hair color? And like, is it going to be like, oh, it's going to be sort of like happy house and like, because I'm happy right now? Or like, should I like, because I do love this universe.
Well, yeah.
But that's so cool that you found that lane.
Yeah.
That's like, oh, this is actually how I can, be creative.
Well, and the other thing is too, is like, well, I'll use example. So I just recently dropped a song, Fever Dream. We love this song. Yeah. And it was really interesting because obviously the conversation with the label was, okay, Heartbreak House universe, where are we going to go with it? I'm over here very happy in my situation. So the kind of the meeting point that we found was, let's do a song about kind of the Delulu parts of like entering into a relationship or in the dating space, right? When you meet someone, you're going to hype them up in your head. They may not end up being the person that you hype them up to be. We hope it works out, but it doesn't. Right. So there's little ways and nuances I think that I've been able to stay within the world that's applicable to my life and also be like universal enough to apply to other people. Because I have a friend who listened to Fever Dream. She goes, oh my God, it was so happy because you're like happy in love. I had another friend who was like, oh my gosh, I love that song because it's about when you meet someone, they don't live up to your expectations. So now it's kind of more open for interpretation. And I think that's what's really amazing about music is like, you're not going to take from an AC/DC song what I'm going to take from it. And that's okay.
Totally.
And that's what's awesome about it. And then we can talk about it and then we can see each other's perspectives. And then the song lives longer than, just a few days.
But what's amazing is that like, instead of, I'm not in that place anymore. And so I'm going to stop writing and I'm going to stop like contributing. Right. That it's like, how can I continue to contribute? And of course there's like, the goals of like what you're trying to do with the project and, growth and, all of that. But it's like just from the pure sort of, creation place that it's like, okay, like I just think that that's so interesting that it's like, because a lot of times, artists, they'll have, those chapters and eras where, Picasso had like his blue period.
Right, and then he was done.
Yeah. And then he was done.
Which is totally fine. I have a lot of friends who, who are in the arts and they go do a drum and bass album and then that's it. Yeah. And then they're done with that. And then they go to future bass and then they're done with that. Yeah. And for me, like I said, I'm going to do this as long as I can. So if that's how I'm going to milk it, let's do it. But again, that's not for everyone. And that's not, I'm not going to pretend I'm like the blueprint for success or whatever. But it's, it also like brings me joy that I can continue on telling a story or expanding a universe that fans have connected to, like whether they were 18 and now they may be 25, or if you were 16 and now you're 21, you know what I mean? You can grow with it because I'm growing with it. And
Yeah. Do you think that, and this is like, it's a tough question, but like, do you feel like having been in it as long as you have, I can't imagine that like, there's not some level of like just experience and jadedness, to like certain things that can happen. Yeah. But tell me about your relationship with just like performing and like getting in front of people and playing your stuff now. Like, do you love it the way that, is it different, or like, do you love it the way that you did, in the beginning?
So I still 100%. I mean, my favorite thing to do in the world is to be on stage and to be DJing. I could be DJing. You press play. Yeah, I mean, I could be DJing in my studio by myself, and I'm still having a great time. Like it could be 8 hours, and I'm like, oh, I should probably drink some water.
Oh wow.
But that being said, obviously there's times I think, if I could, I always laugh about this because you always hear artists who are like, if I could go back to when I was unsigned and playing in someone's basement or whatever I could. And I think what happens is when you start, so again, also was talking to my manager about this. I said, I think what happens is a lot of artists start touring. Well, they make music to tour versus touring because of the music. And what I mean for that is when this really becomes, I keep hitting this and I apologize. When it becomes a real business and when your livelihood and the livelihood of your team are at stake, all the personality of it starts getting chipped away at, right? Because what happens is again, you might be sick. If you cancel the show, you don't get paid. The manager doesn't get paid. Your manager has kids. There's a lot of guilt that goes there. And so there's definitely been times where it's like the third show of the weekend where I'm like in spiraling of like, I'm really tired. And then I have to remind myself that's like, it's a self-check of like, okay, we understand that. But what is it about this set that's going to be really fun? And that's when I start getting creative. If I've been playing the same, like a Heartbreak House, if I played that the other 3 nights, maybe I don't play it tonight. Maybe I play a different iteration or I make an edit of it or I mix it differently. And that comes from me. And again, that might not be everyone's solution to being jaded, but I do try to catch myself when I start kind of like glazing over or like getting lazy.
Sure.
That, hey, you wanted to do this. And just because they want the fun sucked out of this and because it's becoming a numbers game doesn't mean that it has to be. Like I was in Texas not too long ago and I had a two-day set, meaning I did a daytime festival and then the after party. And I was so tired. I was like, I knew I was going to be done at 4 a.m. My flight was at 6:50 a.m. I was kind of just in that headspace of like, I just got to do whatever I have to do. And then I was like, no, hold on. I haven't played a really late night set in a long time. Let's just do like a total like clinic terrace dub vibes. And like and again, people came and they're like, whoa, that you didn't play any of your hits. You didn't play anything. And I was like, I know, because I had to keep it interesting. And I had to, and
you had that inner dialogue with yourself.
Oh my gosh. I was literally talking to myself, like putting my makeup on, like, you got this. Like, we have to mix that. We have to do something,
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because it does. I mean, I can't even imagine. You look at the guys who are jetting off, who play festivals and they jet off to Vegas and then they go somewhere else. Like that's what happens is it becomes this numbers game.
Right.
And,
right.
And it's very easy to just kind of like go on autopilot.
Totally.
And I think, and that's the other thing too, is I've definitely had people who have reached out to me to like, oh, could you help me make a set for this? And I'm like, if we're not making our own sets, what are we doing?
Right.
Like
right.
If it's getting to the point where like you're too busy that the actual craft is getting lost, like, man, like I don't.
Because that, like, of course, the music, is because it's choices. So when you make a song, it's just filled with thousands of choices.
100%.
And then when you put together a set, it's thousands of choices.
Right.
And that is generally like what the audience wants. Is they're like, I'm curious in your taste. I want to know like your choices that you're making. It's like it seems like we like the same things.
Yeah.
And like that's why they're actually going to see you. I mean, there, of course, is the like, they're just there to be there because of the experience of the festival or the show. And they're maybe not there for the artist, but the ones that are there for the artist, that's why they're there.
Yeah.
It's like that connection.
And I think the other thing is too, for me, I'm very candid with my audience and with my fans. Like even during live shows, there's a lot of DJs who don't get on the mic at all. And I'm not saying I go on monologues and talk, but I am very candid. Like I'll say little things like, here's a mix you guys haven't heard before. Like I communicate to them things because again, not everyone in my crowd is a turntablist.
Yes.
So they're not always going to know what I'm doing or like why it's relevant.
Yeah.
So like for instance, I'll give an example. I just played a Insomnia the other day, which is like a 90s trance anthem. Yeah. And I got on the mic and I was like, not all of you are going to know this next song I'm playing, but I promise you, like, stick with it. Don't go get a cigarette or a drink. Like, and I did some edit with it or whatever. And I'll be very candid. Like if I'm really tired, like at that after our set, I literally got on the mic and I was like, guys, this is going to be completely different. Like, I'm not going to lie to you. Like, this is my second show of the day. If you saw me earlier, thank you. It's not going to be a repeat. And we're going to do this together.
Yeah.
And when you have that level of candidness, for me, it gets them even more involved.
It's connection. It's full on connection. And I feel so much more connected to you knowing that you're not a robot. You're a person. I remember I was at some like industry party thing, and it was the first time SZA performed.
Oh my gosh.
And like she was on stage and she said, hey, or it was the second time. She said, this is the second time I've ever performed. I'm so nervous. Yeah. And there was like 50 people.
But it humanizes you.
And I was like, I love her. Like not only was she so amazing, I was like, the fact that like she said that instead of like, sometimes the instinct can be, I'm going to fake it, till I make it, and I'm going to act as if.
Which we all have to do. And that's still a thing. But I think also too, for me is because I've set that precedent with my fans ahead of time that I'm going to have a level of candor or whatever. For instance, like let's say I'm at a festival and there are sound issues. They know that because there's a dial, I'll get on and I'll be like, let's try that again. Right. Or, hey guys, we're going through something. Give me 30 seconds and I'll get you moving. And I think, and again, that's not every DJ wants to talk to people, and that's their MO, and that's fine. I'm not preaching that. Yep. But for me, what's allowed me to take a little bit of the pressure off and to stay excited about things is because I can have that open convo.
It's so cool to do that. Like it's my pet peeve when the DJ does the hands up thing and sort of like points at the sound guy and does like the angry, just like what
do you
what
do?
the fuck?
And the sound guy's like, what?
And it's like, listen, like, and I remember actually Aoki, back in the day, I had done a few shows with him, and we had like sound issues at like an arena, and I remember he took the mic and he went out in the crowd and he was like, who has a joke? While they were like figuring out the sound. And then, people are telling jokes, and like he's still interacting with the audience. And then he comes back on, plays Warp. The whole thing goes nuts. Right. And I was like, that's like how you do it.
Well,
like,
and I guarantee you, because he flowed through it naturally, I guarantee you the highlight point of the night wasn't that there was a lull, but that he played Warp. You know what I mean? And that's always the biggest thing I tell people is like, it doesn't really matter if we're tired or if the set isn't, because look, it's a numbers game. You're not always going to bat 100 and play the best set of your life.
That's right.
Things happen.
That's right.
Things,
always.
The world exists. And so, but if you can create those memorable moments, like 9 times out of 10, even if it was like not the best show or maybe not the best turnout, as long as you connect to a certain people, there's still a nugget or thing to talk about. You know what I mean? And I think that's the biggest thing for us as artists, again, as things become so out there and especially when content is king and you always have to have that little moment or that little snippet or whatever, it's really easy to like forget that there's still a real people audience there.
Yeah.
It's not all about the clip you're going to get for TikTok later that might go viral.
That's right.
And I think a lot of people forget that. And I see a lot of my peers forgetting that. And you're playing your set for TikTok or the recap, the after movie versus the people in the room.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, if there aren't people in the room, then we don't get to have the platform, and it becomes a circle of life, right?
It's the whole relationship of, like what it is. Different, but like some artists, it's like, I make tunes in the computer and and
that's their brand.
Yeah. And that's like, I don't really care about, the rest of it. But like I said earlier, it's like, I look at it as a movie and like, I love your movie and I'm so excited to see, where you go and like I know you have many, many chapters, but I'm, very excited for
really appreciate
this next one. And like, thank you, so much for doing this and being here. And
hey, thanks for letting me talk about myself for the last hour. It's always fun for me, especially when as conceptual as I am. I very rarely, beyond just like talking on like an Instagram story or whatever, get to tell my story and kind of talk about kind of the nuances of the story. It's really fun for me to talk about the origins of the Wenzday universe. And I think when people hear about it, maybe from a podcast, and then they go listen to my music and see the music videos I've made or directed.
Sense. Yeah.
It clicks and it adds another level, and maybe it will help someone connect to my project who maybe wasn't connected before.
Yeah.
And Heartbreakers were really fun. I promise. Come hang with us. And that's what's most important for me is I do it for me, but I also do it for them. And I wouldn't be where I am without the support of those fans and fans that have been willing to change with me, grow with me, pivot with me.
Yeah.
So it's all for you guys. Thank you.